Okay. So just as a really quick intro, as you all know, this book, Open Pedagogy Approaches, Faculty, Library, and Student Collaborations, came out just as July began. And I want to introduce Alexis Clifton and Eileen Daly-Boas in particular on the line as members of the editorial board. So I'm going to put up this PowerPoint. And as you saw in the email last night, just a very general outline for what we can do today. I will encourage you as your piece comes up, or if in the chat you want to introduce yourselves. We do have some folks from South Carolina, which is very exciting that the word about this book got out. And then we have a really good contingent from the University of Rochester, instructors, faculty support, librarians, etc. So yeah, so what I wanted to say about the book very quickly is just that it's more than just an anthology of case studies about open pedagogy. Actually, it is an open educational resource in itself. So everything within the book, any materials that are showcased, the chapter writings, that is all open to revising, remixing, resharing, etc. And Alexis, do you want to talk a little bit about the adoption form?
Sure. So I should have had the link handy, but I put the link to the book. I'm sure you probably have all got it somewhere, but just so it's handy, it's in the chat now. As part of the end matter in the book, there is a link to an adoption form. Here it is. That is pretty simple. We don't expect this to be used as an actual textbook in most cases, but if you're using it in some way, adoption is a pretty broad term here. You know, if you're adopting a model or adapting an exercise that you see in the book, or if you're sharing a chapter with a reading group or colleagues on campus, we'd love to know that. So it's just a very simple form. Tell us a little bit about what it is and how you're using it, and that, you know, information gathering is good. And we don't see this as a finished project. Well, finished. Phase one is finished, definitely, but we hope that the conversations keep going and that, you know, this is a springboard to other larger, broader conversations. So we're kind of still toying out ideas with that, what phase 2 and beyond might look like, and this conversation today is definitely part of that.
Thanks, Alexis. And in addition to all these materials being open educational resources, this book was actually a professional development tool for all those who worked on it. That would be the editorial team that worked on it. You know, we were learning so much about open pedagogy as we went. The authors, reviewers, copy editors, they all were also learning as they went through, and then of course the audience for the book. We hope that you learn as you go and you read through the chapters. And then one last surprise of what this book is all about, it was actually a focus project for open pedagogy in a course at the University of Rochester. There was a course in the spring called Practices and Principles of Copy Editing. And so those students actually got wrapped into open pedagogy by becoming copy editors for a few of the chapters that you'll see in the book. So definitely very meta, definitely very practicing what we preach. So with that said, and if you do have questions as people start talking about their summaries, please feel free to filter them into the chat. We'll try and be as efficient as possible getting through the summaries, just so you can all get a high-level view of other chapters that are in the book that you didn't actually read. But we will definitely leave time at the end for discussion and questions, etc. We are down a couple of chapters, so hopefully that will streamline some time as well, just because of some last-minute cancellations. And see if I can get this PowerPoint to move forward. Okay, so we will start those brief summaries. 3 to 4 minutes per chapter is about all that we can handle, just very high level, you know, what are the big ideas of the chapter that you read. But as you listen to each of those summaries, maybe we can put these into chat, but these are some things that we'd like you to be listening for and thinking about as you listen to each of the chapter summaries. And I will grab these and I'll put them into the chat. Okay, so any questions before we begin with different summaries of the different readings you had? All right, well, let's get started. So we're going to start where the book begins with the Introductory Framework and evolving into the Open, a framework for collaborative design of renewable assignments, I feel is a really great place to start. So Melanie Martin from the Simon School of Business and Becky Leathersich, who's a librarian at Geneseo, they read and discussed this book. So do you guys want to talk about it?
Sure. Becky took wonderful notes for us when we had our meeting, and our group also included Kristen Totleben. So here's what we came up with. What were your immediate, these are the questions that were asked to guide us. What were your immediate reactions to the ideas in the selected chapter? And we all felt very strongly that the chapter gave very good tips and detailed outline the full process of making a renewable assignment. It was within the context of teacher education, but it was really helpful for us to be able to envision how the approach, how to approach building renewable assignments. That was very well laid out and very helpful. We also were impressed with how the chapter highlights a successful collaboration between a faculty member and a librarian, and exactly how they work hand in hand and what they're responsible for and how they can help each other get the renewable assignments constructed. We were also asked to discuss what benefits and challenges we see to the approach. In this case, students were teacher candidates, and it was kind of cool because they were both the teacher and the student when they were creating the OER. So they ended up with a lot of different skills, which we thought was really beneficial. We realized that OER and OP may not fit every subject or every librarian/professor. We also felt that basically a single assignment or module was more feasible than a full course or textbook in generally speaking. And the faculty librarian collaboration models the student collaboration and learning experience, which I think we also thought was very beneficial. What different strengths did the faculty, library staff, and/or students bring to the project? Faculty can focus on content, while the library staff can focus on resources, scholarly communication, copyright licensing, and things like that. Students who openly share their work assist other students, potentially worldwide, and take ownership of their work. And also students are able to gain or hone transferable skills and practice using tools before they enter the workforce. How does the reading strengthen your understanding of what open educational resources and open pedagogy are or could be? We felt that it strongly communicated that OER, OP could be very open-ended and accessible. It's more of a mode in that you aren't changing the content, but the way that it's being delivered or shared. OER really requires clear intentions as an instructor and clear intentions for the student. Are there small to big ideas that you would incorporate into your fall course planning? We felt that under the circumstances, the uncertainty of the fall semester could prove to be a good time for something like OER, and we will share, I as a faculty support person, will share this idea with faculty and then start the conversations either for fall or for other terms going out. Other thoughts were, we thought that we wanted to focus on or mention the importance of inviting students to share their OER, not mandating it, but helping students to consider their digital presence. And that's it. And thank you, Becky and Kristen.
Great, thank you, Melanie. Yeah, Kristen is off today, so that's why she couldn't be here, but thank you. Okay, approach open pedagogy in community and collaboration, and that's from two of our librarians at U of R, Lara and Stephanie.
Okay, so this chapter was mainly about a community of practice that was formed by a librarian and an academic technology consultant from the University of Colorado Boulder. And what they tried to do was create a community of practice where faculty would discuss open pedagogy in one semester and then resources the following spring. So it seems like from the chapter that there have been 3 cohorts so far. And our main takeaways that we got from this chapter was we really appreciated the commitments or guiding principles that they outlined in the chapter. They included access and equity, community and connection, agency and ownership, risk and responsibility. Another kind of unique aspect of these discussions that they had is that a student was included. This was a student employee who was, compensated for their time. And the student really provided valuable insight from their perspective about how open education, would work, what their views were in actually using this in a class or in a project. So this is really valuable rather than, just having faculty trying to learn from each other. Having that student perspective was very valuable. In the specific sessions, there were 4 different kind of discussion sessions in one semester. They would repeatedly connect the Acrl framework, mapping the framework to open pedagogy practices. And for faculty members who aren't familiar with the Acrl framework, this is really like a model that academic librarians use to use in teaching students about research and evaluation of information. So it was interesting how the authors were able to map the framework to specific practices in open pedagogy. For the future, I think that the information presented in this chapter is just, it's really great. They connected to, they have a link to their LibGuide that they created that has a bunch of slides, how they ran their sessions. It's really a full package that could be reused, possibly at the University of Rochester next year. We can kind of look to maybe like trying to create our own community of practice and using a lot of the information that was presented in this chapter. It's definitely a possibility. Lara, do you have anything to add?
No, I was just going to add in the chat, but I'll add now that one of the quotes that I liked from it was that they came to see open pedagogy as a way of thinking and a way of acting when approaching learning and teaching in a contemporary learning context. And they tried to kind of carry that through in the sessions that they did with faculty, but also in how they approach talking about open pedagogy. But otherwise, great. Stephanie, good summary.
All right, great. Thanks, you two. That is an exciting idea, and especially if they give us a roadmap, that's even better. That's what OER is all about. Okay, so moving on to open pedagogy, big and small, comparing open pedagogy efforts in large and small higher education settings. And that's Lydia and Eileen.
Hi, I'm going to go. This is Eileen Daly-Boas. I'm an outreach librarian at the University of Rochester. So the nice thing about this chapter is that it is, there's oftentimes an assumption that it maybe can't happen at small schools, or if it happens at big schools, big universities, it's because they've got the funding and things. So this was a study to look at a large university and a small college. So the small college had about 1,000 and the large university, oops, and I just lost the number, it was something like 40,000 or larger. It was huge. So what they did is they did interviews, and they were specifically looking for the nature of the OER work that was done, or the open pedagogy work, the motivations that they've talked to both faculty and librarians, and the structural incentives or barriers. And I think they went in thinking it was going to be kind of pretty different, that there was going to be a whole lot of disparities. They found there was actually a lot more in common than not. They have a great literature review. So the first section, as a good social science paper, it has a really full literature review and targeted and sort of, I think, really good at directing. If you need to read something besides our book, read some of these, some of the works in their literature review. They didn't have any adjunct instructors, and they explained it just seems like it's very hard for adjuncts who, to have that support and development, because they're not tenure track often, because they're not tenure track, they don't feel like they've got that kind of support. They often don't know about the support that might exist for taking on these challenges. And of course, one of the themes that's going to come out is all of the prep that's done, it tends not to be terribly well funded. So it's all on the individual, and that greatly impacts adjunct faculty who get paid so much less per class than full-time faculty. So a few of the differences: the larger university had projects that were going on for a longer time. They had started open OER and open pedagogy projects earlier. And so the small colleges were, they tended to have the small college it was only like 3 years, I think, that they had a program going. At the small college, it was often a single librarian who might have been in charge of instruction and everything open and maybe copyright. So you had one contact person, and at the larger university, they had a whole lot of specialized people. So you might have had more of a team approach. In all cases, the librarians were seen as both did advocacy work in terms of pushing forward the ideas about open, but also seen as really useful partners, in the first chapter, I think, where they talked, or the second chapter, where they talked about the librarians could focus on the copyright and scholarly communication, and the professors could think about the content. So why did they adopt? In both cases, it was because they had some online courses, and they wanted to make sure that students, wherever they were, could get access to the text. Publisher costs, including, the sort of near predatory actions, especially as we've seen now, of not having library access, online access for librarians to even license copies of textbooks, and also better content. There was just, if there's nothing out there, the professors and instructors said, we want to have better content than that's currently out there. In terms of incentives, the large universities had them, and the large university had them, and the small college didn't. But they both said that having someone to help them was the big deal. It wasn't so much the financial support, while that made a difference. It was knowing that there was someone there who could help them do it, because it was so much personal time being used towards this. No one has course releases. No one had, it didn't count for tenure for either. So they really saw that one of the incentives, while there might not have been a cash payout, was even at the small school, having someone to collaborate with made a difference. The barriers are not surprising. It takes a lot of time, even to do some small sections. It takes a lot of time. It tends not to be remunerated. It doesn't help promotion. There's no course release. So these are one of the challenges to the barrier. At the university, for the larger university, they found the bureaucracy, whether they were allowed to host something, whether there were contracts and memorandums of understanding were really challenging. So at the small school, they were a little more nimble, but they didn't have quite the support. And at the larger they got, the more support they had, also the more bureaucracy they had. And so I think, Lydia, do you want to add anything to?
I think you did a great job summing it up. There are two main points that I also wanted to reiterate. The barrier and the bureaucracy, I think Eileen was spot on, but it's also in large universities where you have to have committee permissions or department chair permissions to change resources is a big barrier. And they also quoted the work or cited the work of DeRosa and one other person.
Robinson, maybe?
I think so. And they're big proponents of converting it, not just open textbooks, but opening textbooks to allow students the opportunity to publish their own work, to develop the student as scholar, really and truly, I believe. And if you do not follow Robin DeRosa on Twitter, y'all really should. And any of her work, she's fabulous. So those were the two main things, is the opportunities, not just for faculty to create and or find or use, but to how open pedagogy can be used as a device for students in the classroom, and to do away with the disposable assignment, essentially. So students publish their own work and get into that scholarly arena. And I think those were the main things. Yeah.
Yeah, those are all tremendous points. And I will add, Robin DeRosa came to the University of Rochester and was the inspiration for this book. So yeah, so
Awesome.
forward, because we've been involved ever since.
Very cool.
Thanks. Okay, so moving along to textbook replacements. We had two in this category to discuss, but one person couldn't make it today. So Sue, do you want to talk about this general psychology open textbook?
Hi, I'm Sue Cardinal from the University of Rochester, and let me give you a summary of what this chapter was about in case you haven't read it. Switch over. Okay. So basically at George Washington University, a small team of librarians began a grassroots campaign around providing affordable access textbook options, kind of like what we're doing, sending emails, offering workshops, giving presentations to faculty. One member in the psychology department was really inspired to learn more, and so they partnered with librarians to start working on getting a book for general psychology, because they felt like this is a class that maybe people only take, this one class on psychology and that's what they know. And so it was important to get some good quality textbook. So the librarians used their searching skills to find some possible materials. And Dr. Schell wanted to know what the students expected from a textbook. So he surveyed them over 3 semesters. So this is how the students got involved. Initially, the students in the class told him that they were concerned about cost. They preferred a lower cost, and they would prefer prints. And online for free sounds pretty good, but they still wanted a print version. They were really adamant about having some print. So he said, well, let's take a look at these open education resources. It turns out OpenStax has a psychology book that can be used both in print and online. So he had a student that had taken the class, and this is a second role that students had, review the book to see if all the major topics were covered, and yes, they were. And then a second student reviewed the book to see what were the differences between the formats, between the print and the online. Were they consistent? And yes, they were. And so he adopted it in class. And the students did really well with it. They liked it. He did a post-use survey, and they, in general, thought it was really good. There were some criticisms, just knowing that there's a cheaper version beforehand, so maybe a student had bought an expensive text and then discovered, oh, he's using a free book. And then there, some of the students wanted more multimedia videos, and they wanted answers to the problem sets. And I was just thinking about that. Another role that students could do, but he didn't mention this, would be to create problems and answers. But in any case, I think this was a good example of how a textbook is implemented. I mean, one of the things that I found interesting from my perspective as a librarian is how much effort it takes to implement something like this. In the appendix, there was a long list of supplementary videos and resources that the librarian and the faculty had found and added to the class. So if you know of someone teaching a psychology class that's interested in flipping over, this could be a really good start, especially if they're using that OpenStax book. So I really liked how the students were involved, both as reviewers of the online textbook and also how the surveys provided like the student perspective to the faculty all along. So I think this was pretty successful, saved costs. They said the grades of the students were actually a little bit better than they had been in previous semesters. And of course, there's a lot of variables. You don't know exactly if the textbook was the sole thing that contributed, but it certainly didn't hurt things. So that is my summary.
Hey, thanks, Sue. Yeah, this chapter does a great job. If ever there's a skeptic of an open textbook, they really went through the paces to make sure that this was the right way to go. So thank you. That's a great summary. Okay, so let's see. We have probably 15 minutes to get through 5 chapters. So if you can try to get your summaries to 3 minutes, that would be great. But this is great information. So we're going to move to student projects, and Sue was already alluding to some of this based on how to involve the students. So Jean and Pauline talked about teaching Wikipedia.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Pauline and I agreed that I would go first and then she would fill in. So I've been interested in Wikipedia assignments ever since I went to the American Historical Association in Denver about 5 years ago. And Wiki Education sent a team to talk to us about how you can actually formally connect a class to the Wiki Education group. And then they give you technical support and training and advise you with your students. So in effect, they work like another collaborator in your class. I've been meaning to do it ever since, never got around to doing it because always I thought, well, I can't do it until I know what it will be like, and then I can't know what it will be like until I do it, but I can't do it until I know what it will be like. This is familiar to some of you when you think about doing something new. But since this year we have no idea what anything is going to be like, I thought, well, okay, fine. This year it will fit right in. And so I decided to sign up for my course, Women and the Arts. And I have a friend in California who also signed up her course, so we are going to be the 2-person faculty support team as we explore the wild world of Wikipedia. One of the biggest things I hope from this for me is that by working with Wikipedia, I will come to understand them from the inside out, and I will be able to give all my students going forward in all my classes better advice about what they can and can't use it for, when it doesn't work, why it might or might not be appropriate. So this chapter turned out to be extraordinarily compatible because it's based on a case study at Case Western, where they were essentially interested in women and science. And both of these topics, women and the arts and women and science, women are underrepresented in Wikipedia. Women and science are especially underrepresented. And my special topic is BIPOC women in the arts, and women of color are underrepresented along with people of color in Wikipedia. So the chapter was so interesting because it was like reading a preview of what I could expect. And in fact, everything they said was very compatible with what I'd heard from the wiki people who I was corresponding with simultaneously. And in particular, I would say 3 things about Wikipedia learned from this chapter and confirmed by my own experience. First of all, it is a massive open resource. It might be the biggest open resource in the world, and it is definitely a place where students can contribute their scholarship on a public platform and take pride in their achievements, although they have to be willing for the possibility that, unlike a paper, someone else may rewrite their entire article after they have done it, and they may never see their own words on Wikipedia again. So you definitely have to embrace the process rather than the product, I think, if you're working with Wikipedia, because it is never done, and your work there may be evanescent. Then we talked about Wikipedia's guidelines for notability. Wikipedia calls itself a tertiary source, not primary, not secondary, but tertiary. And that means there can't be any article on there that isn't based on at least 3 authoritative sources that already exist. And this, of course, makes it harder for people who are underrepresented in the scholarship to be represented in Wikipedia. Because you can't just go to their unpublished letters or their author site and say, hey, this is an important person. You have to have 3 already written scholarly things about them. And then another thing that is difficult is primary sources. Wikipedia, again, prefers published sources. I had a passionate discussion with a friend of mine who has her students do university archival research on the tombs in Mount Hope Cemetery. And she's like, but why couldn't this be on Wikipedia? And I'm like, don't talk to me, talk to Wikipedia. I'm just reporting the rules, I don't make them up. But we agreed, Pauline and I agreed that this is also a good thing. It may not be a good thing about Wikipedia, but it's a great thing for a class because it forces you to really talk with your students, and it forces your students really to think about, where does knowledge come from? And what does it mean? And who gets to speak and who doesn't get to speak, even in Wikipedia. And what does that mean? And so in the end, I think I recommend Wikipedia assignments for everybody, even though I haven't done my first one yet. The Case Western example encourages me to think that it can work really well. And so far, my own experience has been really good. And the only last thing I would add is that another theme of the Case Western chapter was, you start thinking you'll have 1 library session, then you realize you're going to need 3 library sessions, then you realize it would be better to have 4 library sessions. I say maximal library sessions. We all think our students are digital natives, but it turns out not so much. Thanks. Pauline, what about you?
Well, we're like very much over 3 minutes. Sorry about that. But
I'm sorry.
No, that's totally fine. It's to be expected. Just wanted to add, I actually did a Wikipedia project in graduate school, and it was like really cool and empowering to be part of the knowledge creation process. So, and it was great to talk to you, Jean, about that chapter.
Yeah, this is really exciting, Jean, that you were already heading this way, and that this article really confirmed some of the things that you were thinking. So awesome. That couldn't have worked out better. So Nancy Aris is from our Warner School of Education, and she's going to talk about Whose History, which is a really exciting project. It was one of my favorites.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad to be here, and thanks for pulling this all together. This was a really fascinating project. It combines open education resources with place-based education. So it's with a teacher education program at in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. So what they recognized was there was a underrepresentation, not surprisingly, of Latinx people in history and social studies curriculum in Texas. So what they did was work with the idea in open publishing that students are not just consumers of knowledge, they are producers. So working with librarians and the teacher education faculty, they collaborated to develop lesson plans around the history of Latinx communities in Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley in particular. So that's the place-based part, where everything was grounded in the history there. turns out some of the students have relatives who were involved in some of that history that even they weren't aware of, because the curriculum is so narrow in relation to the population there. So they worked with the librarians to do archival research. These were history and social studies teacher education candidates. So they did work with primary resources, and that opened up a whole world to both the teacher education faculty and students about what libraries can do. And they produced lesson plans that were then published to the world. So they've already done like 230 some lesson plans published. Now they have 100 students every cycle that go through, so it's a very large scale. But it didn't seem to be all that resource heavy in terms of financing. There was a lot of stuff already in place, so that made it pretty doable. Well, I'm sorry, I was working with Autumn Hogg on this in special collections, and what a great pairing. We are already planning to do some work together. So both of us really like the attention to libraries and librarians working with teacher and teacher education candidates and teaching faculty. And using the local place as a context, or the local context as curriculum was really exciting too, in terms of putting like active learning to work. They also, this idea of this wide audience for students, we know from research, really increases the quality of their products and their own commitment and engagement. So it was really good for that. Some of the things we thought were great was that this provides an opportunity for a long-term collaboration with librarians and faculty. This is not something you would do on a small scale necessarily. It lends itself to a year-long thing, or many years long thing. We also appreciated with the open education resources, this adding a dimension of multimodal learning, embodied learning in lots of different ways to perform or to show what you know. The things we were wondering about were, one, how do you do this if you're not working in social studies and history? Those content areas really lend themselves well to this sort of work in place-based education. So, for example, I'm teaching adolescent development and youth culture this fall. I was thinking about doing something like this, but moving it to that sort of course is something that would take some thinking. Something that Autumn noticed, and that was in the chapter too, is that one of the limitations is on who donates materials to libraries. So we're talking about people being invisible. For example, there's not a lot of collection of the Latinx community's papers from here in Rochester at the university. So there would be some work to be done if you were going to include that group as well. So there's that. She mentioned that the amount of work for librarians seems to be really huge. They used Omeka for their platform, and so she was thinking about what she would be doing, and that seemed a lot to her, so the upfront work is really big. The other thing was relationships among community and universities would be something to work through. We know that University of Rochester and local community have some things to work through. And so that would be an upfront thing too, to build relationships. The collaboration between faculty, students, and librarians was just wonderful. Everybody was a producer of knowledge. Everybody was co-researcher. And I think that was a really good strength. The depth of information that was provided in the chapter is really good. It gives a really good roadmap on how you would do this. It really helped me think, and with Autumn, about if I was going to do something like this in my course this fall, what would it involve? You know, if I'm going to use Rochester as a context for adolescent development, what would that mean? So it was really a very generative collaboration with Autumn, and the chapter is a great, I would highly recommend reading it as a way to think about how this might work across disciplines. So that's it.
Thank you, Nancy. It's obvious there was so much packed into this chapter, and you make a really good point. Start small. You obviously can't publish this, in one semester. So yeah, just little pieces. Awesome. Okay, so we have 2 chapters left in the Open Pedagogical Design area, and Casey, I think you're on the hook. I don't think Savincha's here, and I know Seth wasn't able to make it at the last minute. So, invitation to innovation.
Great, thanks. I know Sarah's on the call too, so if you have anything to add, please go for it. But I know we're short on time, so I'm going to go fast. So this project is essentially about taking a first writing course. They usually do 4 big papers, and they turn the last paper into a multimodal project instead of a traditional text-based writing project. So my immediate reaction was how the paper strengthened my understanding of open pedagogy, because I haven't really engaged with open pedagogy much. I'm an instructional designer at the University of South Carolina. Lydia Fast is my colleague on the call. And she is, we do a lot with open educational resources, but it's almost entirely discussed as an instructional materials situation. So I haven't heard much about the open pedagogy part of it. So I used to teach first year writing, and the multimodal project, kind of the reimagining of one of your papers in a different format, was something that we do. And so it was nice to see that connection between, oh, these kinds of things that instructors do instinctually can actually be open pedagogy. And so that it's really a much bigger kind of thing in instructional materials. So that was helpful for me, especially in my role as an instructional designer. I can use that with my faculty now. Some of the benefits to this particular project with anything kind of similar to a lot of you were saying is it gives agency and relevance to the students. It helps them kind of bring in something that is a little more exciting to them and something that they can take more control of. Some of the challenges for something like this, because it wasn't just that it was turned into a multimodal project, but it was turned into a multimodal project presented in a I'm spacing on the words that they use now, but it was a fair. It was a science fair. I don't.
Yeah, a
pop-up. What's the word there? A pop-up. Sorry. Yeah, it was a pop-up hosted in their iZone, which was essentially a little mini conference for students to be able to share their projects. So I think that the logistics of setting that up is a pro to the project because students were able to be part of that planning, but it's also a challenge to the project because that brings in a lot of logistics for the instructor and for the librarian partners. So similar to that, I think that the faculty member was able to bring in their subject matter expertise, and the librarians were able to help with the logistics and also bring in their design thinking expertise to help students move from the traditional thinking of a paper to the more dynamic thinking of different modalities for how you kind of convert your arguments into different formats for different audiences. And I think that, I think a couple other people said is, since my role is faculty support, it's nice to be able to help faculty see when they're doing projects like this or when they're interested in projects like this, that there is theoretical and pedagogical support behind the things that they're doing, which can help sometimes with convincing academics that something's worthwhile and sometimes convincing departments that something's worthwhile as well. So yeah, Sarah, that's a quick rundown. Is there anything you want to add?
That's actually perfect. Thank you, Casey. And yeah, and I think like just as everyone mentioned, and even in chat as well, the whole aspect of giving agency to the students and that flexibility is, I think, what really sets it apart to just enhance the creativity. I think just more controls. Yeah, that was great. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you. And I like that piece about the theoretical support behind these ideas, because it can be scary to jump out and do something new, but kind of tried and tested ideas in theory always helps. Okay, one last report, and then we'll have a little bit of time just to kind of pull everything together. But Dan is going to start with what if we were to go, and then Kyle may be able to pop in. He's got a lawnmower situation going. So.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a history PhD student at the U of R. So our chapter was What If We Were to Go? Undergraduates Simulate the Building of an NGO from Theory to Practice. This was a project that was done at SUNY Geneseo. I forget which department it was in, but Kim actually worked on this project when she was at Geneseo. And essentially, the class was divided into teams and anthropology. Okay. The class was divided into teams, and each one had to design a hypothetical NGO that would operate in Haiti. And so they had to build essentially a web portfolio using, a basic content management system. They would use maps to diagram exactly where in different cities or different counties that their NGO would operate. And then they had to present their portfolio at the end of the course. The article also talks about using messaging apps like WhatsApp so that the students can be engaged in real-time conversation and development of their project, even when they're not in the classroom. And since this is from a couple of years ago, I think websites like Slack, tools like that have kind of, that it's become more widely used over the last 5 years or so. I think it's an interesting article because there are implications for not just for designing sort of like social justice nonprofits, but I think any kind of project where students have to do some kind of a policy portfolio, that there are free open source web design tools, timeline tools, mapping tools, and communication tools that they can use to organize and present their project.
Great. That was super concise, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Kyle, are we still dealing with noise issues? If there's anything to add. I'm going to guess maybe yes. Okay. So the hope for this session was to give you just kind of a quick glimpse at a couple of the different chapters. There are certainly many more to go. But with about 7 minutes, we'll open the floor to some of these ideas that we had you thinking about as you were discussing the different chapters. If you have questions for particular chapters, let's open it up, and what did you hear, and does this help with a better understanding of what can be done with open pedagogy? At this point, I'll open it up to the Brady Bunch here so we can all see each other.
I'll jump in with a really short thing that I heard that's not necessarily in the textbook as much as in our book, as much as I heard from people saying is, right, we don't have a whole lot of experience about knowing people who have done this. So creating that community of librarians, maybe students who have already participated, faculty members, right, the groups that are out there. And I think one thing that I think librarians are especially good at is finding out where those groups are and pulling them together, like Alexis and Kim pulled together, right, this whole collection. It feels like we've got kind of a family of people that we know we could ask questions of. And I think having those resources, I was a first-gen college student, and a lot of what I hear reminds me of when I was, a freshman or first year. And I didn't even know what I didn't know. And I had no idea about the resources that were out there that could help. So what I hear is a lot of that. I'm not even sure. And I think it's the case a lot of librarians aren't sure of what's happening. And so I think when we pull together as a team, that works, I think, really well to help for the next step, which is going to be, like in some cases, like Nancy said, having the community the universities and communities working together to pull in some of those things into our special collections so our faculty can write about them, so there can be published papers, so then Jean can use them in Wikipedia, right? That we've got this ecosystem of people collecting together and working together. But first we need those really tiny nodes of groups that then talk to more groups. And so that's what I heard, a little bit of that fear and confusion and not even knowing what you don't know. So I'm really excited because I feel like this is a good, I feel like it's happening in a lot of places, and I think that this is a way we can start pulling that together.
Can I give an example? Oops, sorry.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Go on.
Go ahead, Lydia.
Well, and to add on to that comment, we have a lot of faculty here at South Carolina who are doing a lot of these cool things. They're not necessarily looking at it from the perspective of I'm doing open pedagogy or I'm using this theoretical process. They're doing cool, fun things and innovative things, but they're not all tied together. And we hear about it when we're working with them individually, but being able to pull them all together, but they're not associating this activity in the classroom with open educational resources. And our open educational resource librarians are fantastic and are wonderful, but they're not necessarily at the point of pulling in and tapping into those faculty members that are already doing the development of resources in their classroom, you know? So I think we've got really, really great librarians, and one in particular who is head of circulation who has just spearheaded OERs across campus, and she's a fantastic librarian. But her whole thing is as affordable of a resource for students as possible, free if at all cost. But also, she's developed a system that she will do anything to help faculty members find resources. You know, so if she will hand deliver a book to you if you need it, not necessarily during COVID, but during normal circumstances. But yeah, we've got to somehow pull these people that are doing this together. You know. Oh, yeah, Tucky Taylor. Okay, it's you, Casey. That is our head of circulation, Tucky Taylor. She's been with the library for about 30 years, and she is fantastic. But
yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Just to follow up on the use of the messaging tools, I think they can be really useful for organizing team projects. The only hesitation I have as far as like the educator's perspective is that, you know, if there's an in-class discussion that's happening, or if there's posts that are happening on Blackboard, you know, the teacher can monitor that. I worry a little bit about using Slack or I mean, granted, we can't control how all of our students communicate, but I do worry a little bit, like if there's an incident, if someone says something offensive and the professor doesn't see it, or then when the course ends, okay, do we archive the Slack? You know, how long do you keep those materials for in case there's a question about a grade or a student complaint? That's just one thing I wonder. It's not so much open education, but sort of like, what do you do with the information that gets produced in the course of one of these open projects once it ends?
Yeah, that's a good consideration, Dan. I mean, there's so much that could be going behind the scenes. In the case of the NGO, typically students were using Twitter at the time, and there was a whole lesson in even how to investigate, just like you would for any other scholarly resource. Like, okay, you found somebody on Twitter, like, can you dig deep and find out who they are, what their expertise is? So they were using it more for connecting with those experts that are on the ground. But I do think there was probably some communication among the team as well.
Yeah, and I think if I can jump in, one of the nice things, and I think this might be back to large university versus small college, is when there's some resources, you can actually, we have groups of, you know, IT resources to say, what, we have this issue, we want to solve this, we want to have this, you know, this work environment that works for what our students need, not force them into the work environment. Like Blackboard works for a lot of things, but a lot of people are using Yellow Dig now to have these conversations that are happening online. Like, what is out there and what materials are out there that we can incorporate, have behind the scenes, have some, you know, so that you don't have this mysterious stuff that's happening. I think you're right, Dan. I think we have to think about the ethics of how we protect our students, you know, and give them a safe environment to participate in, especially where I feel like when we think about certain individuals who are way more likely to feel intimidated or possibly be bullied in situations, even at the college, even at the graduate level. So I was bullied in one of my graduate programs. There was, so I think especially as we're having these online conversations where the blurring of what's professional and what's, what you're doing on TikTok. And so helping students define some of that, especially at the undergraduate level, but certainly at the graduate, I think it's a good thing. I think it gives us a means though, then to start to say, we need something that does this. And there are people who can try to solve those problems, and we can follow what worked for people, what was a challenge. And I think asking students for what worked and what didn't is really important too, in terms of empowering them.
So it looks like Jean has a comment. I just want to make a note. It is after 11. So if anyone needs to go, I can certainly stick around and continue the conversation. But Jean, what do you have?
So I actually have a question. I appreciate everything that Dan and Eileen just shared about some of the potential challenges of letting your students loose in the wild and woolly world instead of in the protected space of the classroom. And it reminded me of a question that some students have been bringing up lately that I don't honestly know the answer to myself, but they have said, I have heard some students say things like, hey, if we're going to contribute our labor to producing a public document, we want to be compensated for our labor. And, a grade is nice, but like, what about some actual money? Like you, professor, you are making money. Why shouldn't we actually make money? And right now, I don't have a good answer for this at all, except to say, well, it's like at the University of Rochester, if you do an internship, you can do an internship for course credit and a grade, or you can do an internship for wages or a stipend, but you can't do both. And in this particular case, it's not an extra assignment for you, it's a replacement for another assignment. And so, you're doing it for course credit and a grade. But I wonder if anybody else has heard this or been in this kind of conversation, and what kinds of things you've said, and then more ideally, what kinds of things you think should be. Because I have no idea. It was a total surprise to me.
Well, I know in the chemistry enterprise, there are people that drop out of college when they find things that make them money. And they just say, hey, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my, next 5 years or something, and grow that business. But
well, and I'll chip in with a very short thing, which is FERPA, which means you can't demand that students publish something online in their own names, right, for a grade. So there's that aspect. I think if I had to guess, part of it is that framing too, which is we can do a disposable assignment or we can do something that matters. And certainly there still will be students who are like, and realistically, what we found is very few people are actually getting paid to do open assignments in any way. So while you're getting paid to teach, you're often not getting paid for any of that labor. It's very few places where that's happening. Even here at University of Rochester, we're pushing forward. We thought we would be able to have a great stipend for people to create things. And it looks like there might be a little money, but not really right now. Like there would be very few cases because of the budget cuts due to COVID. So all of a sudden, right, while it looks like we could probably figure something out. In some cases, we had imagined something really big that we could tell everyone, come and we will pay you and you will create things. And that's not existing either. So I think one way of thinking is also, though, having student employees who are, while they're doing one sort of task, do they want to work on these sorts of projects? And we can then pay them to work on these open projects. So sorry,
Yeah,
that was a bit of a word salad there. That's kind of what I'm known for.
To add to that, I put a link to one of our introductory chapters that does take that on directly. It's focused on a community college in a much different context than U of R, but it does speak to some of the ethical considerations of FERPA considerations, but also having a viable opt-out option and alternate paths that students can choose to take. But yeah, there are also examples in this book of cases, like Eileen was just saying, of situations where graduate student interns or paid student workers were contributing towards the work reflected in the chapter, and in some cases chapter co-authors as well.
And I think too, we have to look at internal and external motivations. I know for the NGO course, you know, students reported having researched and read more than they ever would in any other course, and they did it willingly. No one asked them to do it. They also contributed quite a bit to the websites that were very public and open because they were really proud of their work. So, you know, I think that idea for some students of having like a real life scenario, like this is going to have impact on society, on the bank of information that's out there, that was a motivator for the students in that particular course. You know, of course, there are options, and we can offer students who don't necessarily want to participate to the fullest, but those students were never graded on the individual outside public work. So you know, they could learn in a traditional way in the classroom, or they could do something that adds something to the world. So that's how they saw it.
Thanks. It is funny because at one point with one of my students, I did say to them, I said, I appreciate that I am making more money than you are, but at the same time, if you think that anyone is paying me enough to stay up until 1 and get up again at 6, they are not. Although I do all the time.
Well, and I will say, because my husband's an artist, I will say I am happy that undergraduates are understanding that labor should be paid for as an issue of justice and equity. This I don't think is, right? They are getting paid by being graded and things like that, right? This is the contract. And so I think basic understandings of what you're contracting to in this class is one of those things. But I'm always, right, because when people are like, oh, you could just do this thing and you'll get exposure. It's like, yeah, it's hard to eat exposure. But I also think that becomes, as more people do it, we'll have better framing. And I think we can look out for how are people framing this of this is going to be a really exciting class, and that like is an internal motivator. And if you want that out, like there's going to be competition for, do you have whatever job you have? Do you have the skills to do research and stuff like that? Here it's public and it's out there. So yeah, I think we're getting there, but I think there are some funny conversations to have because I think we start at different points of understanding. So.
And I would add to the first draft of the chapter that I participated in, we laid out all of the different competencies that Geneseo was requiring, various life skills and research and digital technologies. And these students left this course and on with career-ready competencies that they could put on their CV. And that would get them that job. That would pay them a lot, I suppose. Okay, well, I don't want to keep anyone much longer unless there's a burning question or piece of discussion that we want to have. But with that, I will thank you all so much for participating in the discussion, both the small group and then this larger group. Like I said, this is being recorded, so we'll put it out on our Open Education Services webpage. And I know that there was a comment in the chat, maybe it was privately to me, but you know, will something like this happen again? And will we gather more community to talk about these things? So to be determined, but we really appreciate any comments that you can filter towards that book to the authors, because you have all the context through the online version of that book. I'm sure they would love to hear from you and what's happening. So thank you all for this great conversation, and have a great weekend. It's Friday. Yay.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for having us.
Sure.
This was super. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Hey, good luck with your course, Jean.
Thank you.
And I'll see you next week, Jean.
Yes.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Good work, team. Good work.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.